This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, we'll just start, and I'll just ask everybody to mute. I think you already have, but. Hi, everybody, welcome. We'll let folks get situated here. And as we're getting situated, I've got a poll on the screen, and it's just asking what grades are joining us today. So great to see we've got lots of folks registered. So please just feel free to let us know what grades are joining us today, or if you're a homeschooler or alternative school. Of course, those are all welcome too. And we'll get started here right at 10:30 Pacific time. So that's about 4 minutes from now. Okay, seeing lots of participation in the poll, which is great. So far, the grades 4 to 6 are leading, which is great. So as folks are coming in, we'll give people just a few minutes here to get rolling, get signed in, and we'll look forward to starting in about 3 minutes time. So lots more folks coming in. That's great. We're going to get started here right at 10:30. It's about 10:28. And good morning to Ms. Hunt's classroom. And feel free to, if you have questions for me, you can feel free to type in the chat. We also will have a Q&A, and you can enter your questions into the Q&A, and then I'll ask those of our panelists as we get rolling here in about 1 more minute. But as you're coming in, if you'd like to just let us know what grades your school represents, or if you're joining us from an alternative school, if you're a homeschooling family, we just would love to just get a bit of a sense of who's with us today. And it's good practice because we are going to do some polls throughout the session today. I love the welcome discussions in the chat. That's great to see. I'll just also make mention, we are recording this session today. Of course, none of the schools will have faces, just names, and we will be sharing the link out with all attendees as well. So if there's any folks that were not able to attend, or any students that are not able to attend, we're very happy to make sure that they get a copy. So we're just seeing lots more folks joining in. And so I'll just invite you to go ahead and fill out the poll that's on the screen. If you're just joining us, just trying to get a sense of where folks are coming from. That's great. Lots of folks from Vancouver and Nanaimo. I love it. Oh, in a kindergarten class. I love it. Miss Bell, thank you for joining us. That's great. We're going to have a good discussion today. Okay, so I'm seeing that it is 10:30. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here, and I'll just share back the results to let everybody know who so far has joined us today. And so we've got, I think, a pretty good mix here of K to 3, grades 4 and 6, and then we've got a few 7 and 8s, and of course some homeschoolers as well. So that's great. And we'll get rolling here. So hi everybody, welcome. My name is Jenn Houtby Ferguson, and I'll be your host today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our Ask an Expert panel. And this panel is a webinar that's designed for kids, and we're going to talk about earthquake safety. We're going to talk a little bit about tsunamis, and we had some great questions about volcanoes, and we're going to talk about emergency preparedness. So we're really going to touch on a few different things. I'm joining you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw and Coast Salish people. I'm here in Nanaimo, British Columbia. So very grateful to be with all of you. And we've got our colleagues on the panel today that are joining us from around the province. So we have Dr. John Cassidy, based in Victoria. We call him the earthquake guy, so you can refer to him as that. My friend Alison Bird, a seismologist, and she's also in Victoria. We call her Seismogal. She actually is a Bitmoji that's kind of fun. Jeri Grant is in Souk, and she is an emergency preparedness expert. And then I have my friend Marc from BC Hydro and Tanya from FortisBC, and we're gonna talk all about earthquake safety and what we need to do if we see things like down power lines or we smell that rotten egg smell, which is gas. So these are my friends, and we're gonna have a good session today. A reminder for the adults on this call or the teachers on this call that if you have any questions, if students have questions, please feel free to type those into the chat, and I will ask our experts for you. But before we get going, again, one more time here, we're going to do one more poll, and I'm going to ask you, before I turn things over to Alison and to Dr. John, I'm going to ask you, what does the word seismo refer to? What do you think that means? So that's a poll, and I'll just invite the adults, or maybe you got a student that could answer this question. What do you think it means? And then I'm going to ask Seismogal and Dr. John to tell you what it means when we start talking about earthquakes. Give you just a couple minutes to fill in that poll. No Googling. Who's got about maybe 10 more schools or 10 more classes to make their guess or make their wager? Okay, they're coming in here. All right, I'm gonna end the poll here. And here for John and Alison, this is what folks think. What does seismo mean? So I'm going to ask Alison and Dr. John to share with us what the word seismo means and how it relates to our talk today. So over to you, Alison and John.
Which one? John, you go ahead.
Okay, so that's right. It's what it means is really earthquakes. It's the sudden release of energy during an earthquake, and that, of course, causes shaking or causes waves. So it's really earthquakes and waves. So looks like the most of the answers were right on.
Thank you. Alison, do you want to go ahead and share your presentation? And I just want to restate for everybody that for those on the call that none of the schools are visible. So just the name of your school or the person who signed in is visible. So that's also, just wanted to reassure folks that that is the case. And Alison, over to you.
Great. So John and I are going to sort of present to you together just a little bit about earthquakes and what to expect from them in this province. So John?
Okay, so you may not realize, but there are earthquakes across much of British Columbia. About 2,000 earthquakes are located in our province and in the Yukon each and every year. So there are earthquakes happening all of the time. They're really small, you don't feel them, and most of them are offshore, as you can see in this image. The blue lines are the active main faults offshore, so that's where most of the earthquakes occur, and that's where the biggest earthquakes occur. But they're happening all the time, you don't realize. And the next slide.
So earthquakes can cause damage. Most of that damage is to older brick buildings and stone buildings. You can see even with this brick building that was really badly damaged, if you'd gotten underneath a table, you would have protected yourself from that falling roof and other debris. So much safer than if you tried to run out of that doorway. Also, buildings that don't have adequate reinforcement built into them can fail. Our building code, however, for modern buildings makes sure that there is enough reinforcement so that those buildings can stay upright. Houses generally do very well, and most of us live in houses. This picture doesn't make it seem that way, but what tends to fail in houses are things like porches, chimneys, and garages. So for me, I have a chimney in my house, and I put extra planks around where that chimney goes through the attic so that if the chimney falls toward the house, those bricks don't come through to where I am in the floors below.
Okay, what this is showing is actually the most common type of effect or impact from an earthquake, and that is what we call non-structural damage. It's really items falling off of shelves, books coming off of shelves, pictures falling from walls, light fixtures perhaps coming down. So this is the most common type of damage that you would see in a North American earthquake. And so it's really important to just be aware of your surroundings. So if you feel the ground starting to shake, this is why you drop, cover, and hold on. It's because of falling items. And before an earthquake, being prepared and trying to have, trying to make sure that there aren't heavy cabinets or items that might fall over and block the exit from your classroom or from your one of your rooms in your home. So this is a really common type of damage here all across North America during earthquakes, during strong earthquakes.
Right. So after an earthquake, what can happen is there might not be any utilities. In other words, you may not have water in your taps, you may not have electricity, internet, you may not be able to flush your toilets. So unfortunately, that lower left corner might be how you have to go to the toilet and after an earthquake. And this map is a map of Christchurch in New Zealand, which had an earthquake several years ago. This is 2 weeks after the earthquake, showing what areas have utilities, what areas don't. So the red areas have no water, no sewage, no electricity, no internet. The yellow areas have some of those and not all. So you can see you might be camping essentially for some time after an earthquake. Yep.
So one of the, this really is the importance of being prepared. Earthquakes strike without warning. They're quite different from big weather events, from tornadoes or hurricanes. An earthquake just happens. And so it is really important to be prepared and to know what to expect. And there's a lot of information out there, and great information, like the Earthquake and Tsunami Smart Manual, the Neighborhood Preparedness Guide. They have a lot of information about things that you should have in your earthquake kit. You should be prepared to be on your own for up to about 2 weeks, especially if you're in a remote area or on an island. And there are a lot of really simple things that you can do to be better prepared for an earthquake. So having shoes and a flashlight under your bed so that you can move around your house after the shaking, when items may have fallen down, the power's out, it's dark, there's broken glass. With those shoes and flashlight, you can at least move around your house safely. So a lot of great information in these two manuals. Tents that we talked about before, for camping. Anything that you use for camping is really great for your earthquake kit as well, for cooking, for tarps and sleeping bags and tents. So having all of this together in one place and ready to go, really important, really helpful.
And maybe John, just before you move on from this slide, I'll just share, we can, when I send out the link to the video from today, I will also include the links to those manuals, just so for quick reference, that if teachers or families would like access to those, the links will be available to them. Thank you.
That's great. And the picture on the right just showing, having heavy items down low, so they're not going to fall over during the shaking like we saw in the previous pictures.
Yeah, just protecting yourself from those things that can fall and topple. During an earthquake, most people will need to drop, cover, and hold on, get down to the ground, get underneath something that's going to protect you from that falling debris and hold on to it. If you're in bed, you stay in bed and cover your head with your pillow and other covers. If you're in a wheelchair, you want to rotate so you're away from the glass, lock the wheelchair, and then crouch down if you can and cover your head and neck. If you're outside, just try and stay away from power lines and other hazards. So there are all sorts of things you can do in different situations. That's a really good idea to practice, and practice what to do in each room of your house, because you won't be able to move from one room to another if the shaking is really strong. And you want to really just stay where you are and get underneath something. If you cannot get underneath something in the room you're in, get to an interior corner, squat down, and cover your head and neck.
Alison, maybe I could just, if I could just jump in here. One of the questions that came from Mrs. Burnham's class was, I think, something you just touched on, which is, could an earthquake, make a wall fall down? I think you talked a little bit about that when you talked about the, putting in some reinforcements in the ceiling to help your chimney not fall down. So maybe you can just sort of touch on that. And I think the other question that came from Mrs. Burnham's class was, how things might be buried, or and there were questions about what do I do if I'm sleeping or if I'm outside. And those questions came from Mrs. Hunt's class at Millstream Elementary School. So lots of questions about what do I do if I'm outside, or what do I do if I'm driving, or what do I do if I'm sleeping in my bed? So I think you've got some really good info here, but I wanted to give a shout out to those students who are asking really good questions.
Yeah, and it's pretty rare for walls to fall down, but if they do, it's the outside walls. So, which is why we actually want you to stay inside, because just outside those buildings is actually one of the more dangerous places. So getting into an interior corner, in other words, the walls, the corners away from windows, away from those outside walls, to make sure that you're toward the inside of your room and the building, that makes you a lot safer. So over to you, John.
Okay, so the importance of preparedness, of having a plan beforehand, knowing what to do when the ground starts to shake, and then what to do after the earthquake. And earthquake shaking might last for just a few seconds, or it might last for a few minutes in some cases, in very rare and very large earthquakes. So after the earthquake, the first thing you want to do is to follow the plan that you've put together. Really important. Don't use your phone. It doesn't take much to clog the phone lines. Using text is a much better option. So don't phone. And outside of the province is a much better option. Expect aftershocks. The larger an earthquake is, the larger the aftershocks will be, and there will be more aftershocks, and they might continue for hours, for days, for weeks, or even longer. So, but you should be prepared and know that there will be aftershocks, more than likely. If you are near the ocean, if you're near the water, a lake or a river, and you feel very strong shaking for, say, a minute, you should move away from the water. You should move to high ground, because these earthquakes or landslides may trigger tsunamis or localized waves in lakes. So you want to move away from the water if you feel strong shaking.
So I'm going to talk about a new program that I'm working on that I'm really excited about. It's an earthquake early warning system, and it's really this new technology. It's been proven effective in Japan, Taiwan, Mexico, and more recently in the United States, in California, Oregon, and Washington. We're developing it up here in Canada, so I'm super excited. It's a system that is triggered by the earthquake itself, and the idea is that we detect the earthquake and we quickly send out, very, very quickly send out a message to tell you that there's just been an earthquake, strong shaking is imminent, drop, cover, hold on. And so the idea is that on your phone, maybe in your school, in an alert or alarm or something like that, and different sorts of things like that, people will be alerted that there's just been an earthquake and they need to take immediate action. And it only gives you a few seconds to tens of seconds of warning. So that's not a long time, but it is enough time to, if you're in your chem lab, you turn off your Bunsen burner, you get underneath the lab bench. If you're in your classroom, you get underneath your desk. If you're at home, you get underneath a table or into a corner, go into these places that are safer. And it makes a big difference to reducing the chance that people are going to be injured. So what can happen is these alerts can also trigger automated systems to take place. So what can happen is it can trigger a device that will open fire hall and ambulance bay doors so that they don't jam shut in the earthquake and those vehicles can still get out. It can move elevators to the nearest floor and open the doors. It can have a special alarm in a hospital so the doctors know to stop surgery and help those patients be safe. And then, stopping trains and all these sorts of things. And all these things can be done with just a few seconds warning, but can really dramatically reduce how much we are impacted by that earthquake and make people a lot safer. So, and of course, people drop, cover, and hold on. And the alerting to people will be automatic. You don't need to sign up. You don't have to have a special app or anything like that. People will automatically get this alert. So that's our contact information, which will be part of the package that Jen will send out. So if you have any further questions after today, you can feel free to email us for those questions. Okay.
Thanks, Alison and John. Lots of good questions coming in here into the chat. Lots of questions about what do we do if we're in a car, or what happens if I'm riding my bike, or what happens if I'm on the stairs and there's an earthquake. So maybe you just want to touch on kind of overall what people should do.
Sure. So let's see. If you're in a car, you want that car to pull over to a safe space, set the parking brake, maybe put on your emergency flashers, and then just stay in the car, just stay put. If you're on your bike, you want to get off your bike and just get down onto the ground so you don't fall. On the stairs, you sit down on the stairs and hold onto the railing and just sit there and wait it out. Those are the things you need to do. And I think I saw someone asking about it being in an apartment building. Same thing as being in a house or in any other building. You just drop, cover, and hold on, get underneath something if you can. If you don't have anything in that room, get to an interior corner and squat down, cover your head and neck, and just wait it out.
I think, Alison, one of the things, and I just want to reinforce what you said, sometimes we might hear in the past, there was the idea that you should go and stand in a doorway, and that is no longer a place that's safe to be. So I just want to make sure that we reinforce that. So there's a question here, and I don't know, Alison or John, but during a tsunami, is it better to run far to high ground or take a shorter route to the top of a roof, for example? So that's from Mr. Niels' class, and they're in Chilliwack.
Okay. Don, did you want to take that?
That's a good question, and there isn't an easy answer. I think it would depend on the situation. You want to be safe, so if you can safely move to high ground, that's the route you want to take. So and again, that's the importance of the preparedness of thinking, of knowing what to expect. Are we expecting a one meter wave or a 2 meter wave? What's the sort of safe level in my community? And so check with your local emergency managers and community organizations to know what to expect. and then having that plan and practicing it. So doing a high ground hike, for example, with your school, practice going to that high level and where's the best place to go. In some cases, it may be your roof, but I think in most cases it wouldn't be. That sounds, you want the safest option. So yeah, I would say check with your local community and know what to expect. What's the planning level in your area? But a great question.
That's a great question. And there are lots, and it's just important to say the hike to high ground, particularly for our friends on Haida Gwaii and on the west coast of Vancouver Island and different parts of Vancouver Island. Those are things that we talk about really regularly in our classrooms. We talk about them in our community. And it's important to know where high ground is, not only from your school, but also from your house or your place of work. So you kind of have to practice all of those routes. So I just want to reinforce that. I'm going to go to a poll. I see lots of great questions coming in, and we'll address as many of those as we can. But I'm going to go to a poll here. This is a question we get asked a lot, right, Dr. John and Alison? So having a lot of small earthquakes are good as it releases the pressure of the earth and makes a big earthquake less likely. We get this question a lot. So we'll let folks just take a minute here and answer our poll. Just give a couple minutes and then I'll share the results. They're coming in fast and furious here. Just a few more schools or folks to respond. Okay, I'll go ahead and share the results here. So it's almost 50, well, not quite 50-50, 65-35. So most schools or most students think that that is true. So Alison and John, do small earthquakes, having lots of small earthquakes, mean that we won't have a big earthquake?
Unfortunately not. Those are the large earthquakes are still going to occur. The small earthquakes actually release very little energy compared to the energy that's released in a large earthquake. So those big earthquakes are still going to happen.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple questions here in the chat around, I think a question I ask you every time we get together is, somebody wants to know, so when are we having that big earthquake, and what's it gonna feel like? So do you have a crystal ball, and can you tell us how big the earthquake could be, and when is it gonna happen?
Well, unfortunately, we don't know. There's no way we can predict earthquakes that we've found yet. So that's why I'm working on the earthquake early warning system, because that at least will give us a few seconds of warning. In terms of telling you it's going to happen next week, it's not possible. We are certainly in a period, well, we're always in a period. We're living in earthquake country. An earthquake can happen anytime. So that's why we encourage people to be prepared now for something that's most likely going to happen in your lifetime.
I think it's also just important to share that we have hundreds or thousands of earthquakes that happen, every day or every week. And so this is something that happens all the time and we don't necessarily feel it, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be prepared. We always have to be ready for an earthquake. We live in, particularly for those in British Columbia, we just need to make sure, and across the country, really, we always need to be ready. So I'm going to pull up another poll here. And this one is about, will you feel a big earthquake? If you live in the interior part of British Columbia, will you feel it? If we have a big earthquake in the lower mainland, do you think you're going to feel that? Do you think you're going to feel that shaking? So yes, like all of BC will feel it, or maybe, or nope, we're too far away from the coast for that to be something that we'll feel. Just give folks a minute here to respond. Okay. Here we go. So a bit of a mixed bag here. What do you think, John and Alison?
Your turn.
So again, the answers are correct. In the case of large earthquakes, and large, I mean magnitude 7 earthquakes along the coast, or 8 or 9, those will be felt in the interior, in Kelowna, Penticton, Vernon. They'll be felt throughout the interior of BC, and the largest earthquakes, the big magnitude 9s that don't happen very often, but off of our coast, those will be felt even by some people in high-rise buildings in Toronto and Winnipeg. They'll be felt across a huge part of North America. So these big earthquakes, and this is not damaging shaking that you would feel at those great distances, but what it would be is like a rolling wave sort of movement that can make you feel dizzy or seasick. But these waves that are generated by the large earthquakes will travel thousands of kilometers and be felt at really great distances.
Awesome, thank you. A couple of questions from Miss Frigo's class, and they are wondering, how common those big earthquakes are, and maybe you could give some examples. I know, John, you were in Peru when following that big earthquake there, so maybe you could just talk a little bit about sort of what it looked like after that big earthquake and how common they are.
Yeah, so the really, tiny earthquakes are happening all the time. The earthquakes that are big enough to be felt, perhaps a few of those each year in British Columbia, maybe a dozen. So those are earthquakes that you feel. Damaging earthquakes every decade or two on average is what we experience in British Columbia. So the big earthquakes, the earthquakes that cause a lot of damage, are rare. They're decades or even centuries apart. So they're rare earthquakes, but they can happen at any time. So it is really important to know what to expect and be prepared for those events. The bigger an earthquake is, the larger the area that's impacted. So a big magnitude 9 off of our coast would impact not just southern British Columbia, but Washington, Oregon, Northern California. So big earthquakes, big areas are impacted. And that's what we saw in Chile and Peru following the earthquakes back in 2010. So, and then of course, aftershocks that we've talked about that will continue. If you're on the coast, tsunami impacts. So the really large earthquakes are rare, but it is important to be aware and prepared for those events and know what to expect. So.
Great, thank you. I think one of the other things that we should note here as well is with tsunamis that we think sometimes that it's only one wave, and it's not. It's a series of waves, and usually the first wave is not the biggest. So it's important to not go close to the water, even if you think, oh, the first wave came in, we're fine and we're safe, and that's not the case. Those waves could continue for quite a long time. And I think that's similar to aftershocks. So there's a question here from Mr. Niels's grade 8 class around, do all earthquakes have aftershocks? And if you live in an earthquake area, for how long might those aftershocks continue?
Well, it depends on the size of the earthquakes. Not all earthquakes have aftershocks, but the larger ones do. What's happening is the part of the fault that didn't completely rupture is sort of rupturing in small earthquakes. And that's why we study the aftershocks, because it gives us a better idea of how the main earthquake ruptured. And the larger the earthquake, the larger the aftershocks, and the longer they continue. In fact, megathrust earthquakes, those magnitude about 9 earthquakes that happen along those subduction zones, those can go on for even years. So they do decrease in size over time, but it's something to consider, because it can be unsettling if you've experienced a big earthquake and then you feel other ones. It can be a little bit scary. So that's why it's always good to know what to do, to be prepared, and then you're a lot more comfortable and a lot safer and usually a lot more contented after an earthquake.
So one last question. This is from Ms. Fryer's class, and they're wondering, when was the last time we had a major earthquake on the West Coast?
Well, we had off Haida Gwaii, we had a magnitude 7.8 in 2012. And I went up there and visited the islands afterwards. And there wasn't a lot of damage because the earthquake was far enough away from the communities that there were only a few chimneys damaged and things like that, cracks, things that had fallen off shelves. But there have been much bigger ones. The other large one that happened on Haida Gwaii was in 1949. For the Vancouver Island region, there was a magnitude 7.3 in 1946. The last major megathrust earthquake was in 1700. And we have indigenous stories around that earthquake about how strong it was and the fact that it caused a tsunami. And that tsunami was really impactful along that west coast of Vancouver Island.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Alison. So before we transition to my friend Marc from BC Hydro, I'm going to ask one more question here. So just a reminder, I know Alison touched on this, but we'll see who is listening. So if you or someone in your family use a mobility device like a wheelchair, or maybe a walker, or maybe you use crutches, and there is an earthquake, what should you do? So you can answer that question in the poll. And maybe while folks are just answering that poll, we got a few more coming in here. John or Alison, where have the biggest earthquakes occurred?
Well, the largest earthquake. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Alison.
So the largest earthquakes occur along subduction zones. This is where one plate goes underneath another plate. And we have the northern end of the Cascadia subduction zone off the west coast of Vancouver Island. And that runs from Vancouver Island down along the Washington coast and the Oregon coast and actually into Northern California. So it's a very long subduction zone. There are also subduction zones off Alaska, Japan, Chile, Mexico. There are all sorts of different subduction zones around the world. And this is where the big earthquakes happen. This is where the largest earthquake occurred, 9.5 in 1960 in Chile, that we've recorded instrumentally. We don't expect them to get much bigger than that, but that's big enough. So there's where the largest ones occur.
Great, thank you. And I'll go ahead here and end the poll, and I'll just share the results. So everybody was paying attention, which is great. The right answer here, if you use a mobility device or somebody that you care about uses a mobility device, is to lock the wheels, cover your head and neck to the best of your ability. And you can hopefully, if you can get near to an interior wall, that's the safest place to be if you use a mobility device. So great. I'm going to ask Marc from BC Hydro, if you'd like to go ahead and share your slides, Marc. Perfect. Thank you. So this is Marc Spencer. He's with BC Hydro, and he's going to help us understand what might happen from an electrical perspective if we have an earthquake. So Marc, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Marc from BC Hydro. There's a couple of things that I want people to think about when an earthquake takes place. And the reason is that BC Hydro has a lot of equipment that's hanging in the air and also a lot of equipment that's in the ground. So for down lines, think about our poles. And so the electrical system is safe when things are out of reach of people. But when an earthquake happens, those poles could come down to the ground, and our wires could come down to the ground, and trees could come in, and other things could come in contact with our wires. And when that happens, it could cause a very dangerous situation. This is what took place in Haiti a few years ago. There was a massive earthquake there, and you can see how the pole is resting, on its side. And one of the things to think about is that our poles are typically about 45 feet, 50 feet high. They're actually set about 6 feet in the ground. So you'll actually see about between 40 and 45 feet above ground, but in the ground, there's only about 6 feet or so. So if you can imagine, you've got a lot of weight on top, you've got equipment up there sometimes, you've got wires, but you have very little in the ground. Under normal circumstances, that's perfect. But in the event of an earthquake, if that ground starts to move around, that whole pole could move around. It could cause wires to come down, cause all sorts of bad things. And so the one thing I want you to know about and think about is what to do if you do see a down line. So every fall we run some advertising around what to do if you see a tree come in contact with a line due to a windstorm. Think about an earthquake as having the same situation. So if you see a down line, or let's say following an earthquake, watch for down lines. And if you do see a down line, recognize that it's a danger and stay back 10 meters and dial 911. BC Hydro equipment is not insulated and it's not safe to touch. And anything in contact with a power line can be a hazard. And you might have heard of that safety shuffle. We have Dave from BC Hydro goes and demonstrates that at times. And so if you're within 10 meters of a down line, we want people to shuffle heel to toe until you're 10 meters away. And that's about the length of a big yellow school bus. Also, be patient and stay away from down lines, even when the power has been off for a while. Our power could be off for a considerable amount of time. The reason is that when there's a windstorm, we know that it's coming. We have a weather forecast and we will see that we're going to have a storm, for example, on the Gulf Islands, between Vancouver and Vancouver Island. And when that happens, we'll muster our crews, we'll get everyone together, we'll be prepared for it in advance. Sometimes it's a day in advance, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but we're all kind of working towards that goal of getting our crews together and preparing. In the event of an earthquake, we're not going to have that same opportunity. So when an earthquake happens, we're going to be caught off guard like the rest of the people. And so that being the case, you should be prepared for a long outage. Also keep in mind that we have no way of making the lines safe remotely. So it's our crews that go out there and make the line safe. And you should never treat a down line as anything other than unsafe. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. There's a really good question here in the chat. And I want to just say again that when you see a downed power line, that's an emergency. And an emergency means we call 911. And so it's, for students that are on this call, I know calling 911 can maybe be a little bit scary because it's not something you should do unless it's really an emergency. But a down power line is an emergency, and BC Hydro and the fire department and emergency services, everybody will come very quickly if you see one. So if you see a down power line, you need to call 911. But let's recognize that during an emergency like an earthquake, those emergency services might be in a lot of places. So the question that one of the students asked here that I think is a really good one is, why do you have to shuffle and not just walk or run away from a downed power line? That's a really good question.
Thanks, that is an excellent question. And the reason you need to shuffle is because when that line comes to the ground, we have devices in place to try to make that line inert or safe, but that doesn't always happen. And quite often we'll see lines come to the ground and remain energized. It happens a very high percentage of the time. And so that line could still have power running through it. And that's why we want you to stay away from it. But that power running through it, electricity is always looking for a path to ground. That power that's running through it could then create a ground gradient where it's going to the ground. So it creates these ripples of voltage in the ground. Voltage is like pressure. So there's ripples of pressure in the ground. If you were to walk across that gradient, you could be exposed to 1,000 volts per footstep and or more even. So what we recommend people do is to minimize that voltage per footstep. You keep your feet together and you shuffle heel to toe for 10 meters, the length of a school bus. And by doing that, you're keeping your feet at more or less the same voltage, which keeps the power from being pushed through your body.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. That's a great question. I think the follow-up here, and I think this is important for maybe some of our younger students who don't have a phone and maybe can't just pick up the phone and call 911 is maybe what should they do? And I think the suggestion there is, just as you said, to shuffle away as quickly as possible and find an adult that can help you call 911. So that might be at your school, it might be in your home, it might be a neighbor's door that you can knock on. But the most important thing is to move away from those power lines and not to touch them.
Well, actually, Jen, I'll just interject there.
Please.
And that not as quickly as possible. Take your time.
Okay, fair.
Do it as slowly and methodically as you need to do. And also another point, as you're saying, rather than leave that site completely, if there's other people around there, make sure they're aware of it as well, because we don't want other people stumbling into that area. So if you're able to stand back 10 meters from any kind of an incident site like that, please warn other people not to approach as well.
Great, thanks, Mark. That's a good reminder. Yes.
Thanks.
In my mind, I was like, we're moving away quickly, but not so much. It's not like going to high ground where you're moving very quickly.
Yeah.
It's a little slower and a little more methodical. So this is great. I'd like to transition to Tanya from FortisBC. And then we will still have some time. I've got lots of questions that are coming into the chat. We are going to talk a little about emergency preparedness as well with Jeri. So I think, Jolene, I'll ask you to share the slides for Tanya, please. And then we can get underway here. But maybe in the interim, I'll share a poll while we're waiting for those slides to come up. And so again, this is just reinforcing what Mark has said here. If you come across down power lines, you should call 911. And what are the questions here? I think you all know the answer. Great. Okay, those answers are coming in and I'll share them and then we'll move to Tanya. Okay. So stand back at least a school bus length. Yes, for sure. And then Mark, what about staying in your car? If you happen to be driving, or maybe your parent or your grandparent is taking you somewhere and you come across down power lines, what should people do?
You want to maintain that distance. So if your vehicle is 10 meters or more away, by all means, stay 10 meters or more away. Stay in your vehicle. Don't approach the down lines. If you find yourself within that 10 meters and you're in your vehicle, what our recommendation would be to call 911, and they can make sure that the lines are made safe before anyone should get out of that vehicle. There is a bit of a process for getting yourself out of the vehicle when there's a down power line on top of it, and that process is to get out of the vehicle without touching any part of the ground and the vehicle at the same time. Once you've done that, to do that safety shuffle for 10 meters.
And any suggestions, Mark, for somebody who uses a mobility device who might not be able to shuffle in the same way that someone who doesn't use a mobility device can do? Any suggestions there?
Not offhand, Jen, but I would suggest that you want to keep, so the electricity, the voltage is going to, the gradient will run from where the line has come to the ground all around in a circular area. If you go in one direction with two wheels that are parallel, I would suggest that you're probably better off that way. So if you can go like directly, put the down power line directly behind you as you're going across that gradient for 10 meters.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share these slides here for Tanya.
Thank you.
And I'll just start here from the beginning. Okay.
Perfect. You can skip right to the second slide, actually.
Sure, there you go.
So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Tanya. I'm with FortisBC. We're a natural gas provider in British Columbia. and we want to talk about safety with you as well. So it's been talked about a lot, and it's a huge part of this is preparing as best you can. So there's a little picture on the right there of a hot water heater in your house. And this is what you use to heat your hot water for your showers, etc. So it stays full of water all day, every day. So things like that can topple over, as Alison talked about, non-structural damage. These are things that you do not want to fall over. So we recommend that you get some straps and secure that hot water tank. You can't get kits to do that, to keep that hot water tank safe, because the last thing you need if you have an emergency like an earthquake is for that water to come through your house if it topples over. And also, if you've got natural gas appliances in your home, the gas is coming through a hose to that appliance. And if you get a hose that is flexible, it can allow for movement if there's shaking in your home without breaking that hose. Our hoses in the ground are made of plastic, so they can sustain some changes in like an earthquake would provide of movement. So we've adjusted that over the years and been using plastic pipe for about the last 25 years. So we can be safer during something like an earthquake. And then again, as spoke about, talk to your family, talk to your parents, make sure everybody understands what you're going to do in your house if you have an earthquake. You know, as you get older and you've got time after school, maybe before your parents come home from work and something like this were to happen, make sure that no matter if you're home alone or if your parents are there, that you know what's expected of you. Emergency kits, as it's been talked about as well, we recommend that you have at least 2 weeks of things available for you. You may not have electricity, you may not have natural gas, so cooking might not be an option for that time period. So it's important that you understand what you can do and what you can have to stay safe and stay healthy and be able to be at home, maybe without access to electricity or natural gas during that time. Do you want to flip the slide there, Jen? So if you don't know, natural gas comes to your home through a meter, which is shown in this picture. These are important that they are accessible for if anybody from FortisBC needs to get to them during any type of emergency. So we ask that you do keep the path clear to your meter at all times. This is not just about earthquakes in general. We talk to everybody about never tie bikes or lean bikes or anything like that around it. If there's snow, if you live in an area that receives lots of snow, to keep that clear and keep it safe. And then if there's an earthquake, we ask you not to touch your meter. Several reasons. One, you would have to have a technician come turn it back on, which if there is an emergency, our technicians, just like Marc was talking with BC Hydro technicians, are going to be out dealing with a lot of different things. So it could be weeks before somebody could get to your house to turn it back on. So the only time that you would look at turning your meter off to shut the gas off to your home is if you can smell gas, which is that lovely rotten egg smell that we all love to talk about, or if you hear gas escaping. So when we say gas escaping, you might hear a little or maybe a loud one that sounds like something's escaping, and then you would look to turn your meter off. But otherwise, it's stay in your home. If no evacuation order has been issued, stay in your home, stay safe, and don't touch anything to do with natural gas during that time. And you can go to the next slide, and that's all I've got for you, unless you've got any questions for me.
Great, thanks, Tanya. I'm just gonna stop that sharing for a moment here. Thanks, Tanya. I think one of the questions was, you know, if the power goes off because of an earthquake, would it be safe to turn on a generator once the shaking is over? So I don't know who wants to take that one, Marc or Tanya. Sure.
Yeah, I can take that on. So the issue with a generator is that depending on how it's connected into the home, if it's connected under the authority of the local, the BC Technical Safety BC or your local electrical inspector, and it's connected correctly, there's no issue with that at all. So it would not be able to send power outside of your home. However, some people will just hook up a portable generator inside their home on their own. If they do that, and it's connected to their home, remember your home is still connected to the BC Hydro system. And what it can do is it can cause a hazard to the workers and to anyone outside of your home by pushing jet power, much like BC Hydro pushes power into our lines. Your home can actually push power into our lines as well. So it can cause a hazard to anyone that's out there nearby, even if there's not a BC Hydro source to it. So we definitely recommend that if you do have a portable generator in your home, it should be installed correctly by a proper electrician under a permit.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark. That's great advice. We're going to transition here to Jeri and talk a little bit about emergency kits, and then we'll wrap up here right at 11:30 as promised. So I'm going to do a quick poll here, and we'll get Jeri ready to talk all things emergency preparedness. So what are some of the things that you should have in your emergency kit? So we've got a long list here: a toy, a stuffy, a puzzle book with a pen or pencil, hard candy or gum, a foil blanket and seasonal clothing, a flashlight with extra batteries, a solar or crank cell phone charger, or all of the above. So we'll give folks a minute to complete those questions, or to answer that question rather. Lots of answers coming in here. So in that link that I'm going to share with everybody, there are some good suggestions about the types of things that you can put into your emergency kit. I'm just going to let folks, the responses are still coming in here, Jeri, so I'll turn this over here in just a second. Okay, so here we go. Lots and lots of good responses here. And the correct answer here is all of the above. So Jeri's going to talk a little bit about what are the things, Jeri, that we should all have in our emergency kit. I know I've got my little kit here. It's hard to see with the blurry background, but I have a kit like this. I keep one in my purse, and my daughter has one that she takes to school, and we have all kinds of good stuff in there, flashlights and some candy. But what do you have in your kit? I know you have one over there. What have you got in your kit?
I do, but this is a little kit that I made up just for here because I'm not at home. And the kit that we're talking about right now is not the family emergency kit. We're talking about a kit that you may put in your knapsack that you take to school, because we don't know when an earthquake is going to happen. You could be at school, you could be on the school bus, you could be wherever, but you may have a knapsack on. So if you have your knapsack, a lot of those things were already mentioned. This one does have a brightly colored flashlight. It has a battery bank. One of the things I like in this little kit, and I'll just show this, it was mentioned, are these little foil blankets. They don't take up a lot of room. They're not heavy, so it doesn't add a lot of extra weight, because I know your knapsacks get pretty heavy with books. A deck of cards, because you'd be amazed how boredom sets in pretty quickly, and you might be everybody's best friend if you've got a deck of cards and you can play a game. Other things, considerations, I like that somebody mentioned having a stuffy, because it's one of the things that makes you feel good. If we're talking about the kit for the family, I always recommend, whether you camp or not, having a tent. Tent's a really important thing to have. Alison showed a slide of a house after an earthquake, and it was just the front porch that was damaged. So if you have a tent, and let's say an earthquake happened in the winter and it's cold, you can have your tent inside your house, and you'd be amazed at how warm you would be overnight. It's quite amazing. One of the things I like to do, and these are from my emergency kit, I like to go to yard sales to get items that won't cost too much, but and don't take up a lot of room. So this is a deck of charades. Always fun to play.
That's fun, Jeri. That's fun.
This one I found at a yard sale. This is a little kit that has 5 different magnetic games, everything from Chinese checkers to snakes and ladders and stuff. Because as I said, you know, your parents may not get bored because they're going to be having to work trying to clean things up, but you might get bored and having some extra items. I think one of the things that John touched on was having a flashlight and a pair of shoes under your bed. I like having, and I'll just sport it, I like having a headlamp. And I have one of these by my bed all year round, and I use it actually almost all year round because I wake up early and I like to read, so it's dark out. But I find I live in a rural area, our power goes out a lot. So having my headlamp means that I'm not having to hold something, the light's on my head, but after an earthquake, this will give you your hands free. You've got that on, you can get things going. So I always recommend a headlamp. And it's a great gift to give mom or dad if you're looking for a present, or to ask Santa, you know, to have something like this in your stocking. And I recommend buying the rechargeable ones. And they quite often come 2 in a pack. They're not very expensive. So it's an item I really like. I know the teachers may not like this item so much, but I really do recommend having it in your little emergency kit for your knapsack. I've got a bright.
Don't use it unless it's an emergency.
Yes, it's a whistle, and that whistle can alert people to where you are. It's a really good little item, but it's not for blowing in the classroom or on the school bus driving crazy. But it's a great item to have. The other thing I'd like to touch on, I think somebody asked about pets. So one of the things that you have to consider with your family emergency kit is making sure that you have supplies for your pets, and that's making sure you have enough water for them, and it's also about having food put there. So always remember, and most of us, you know, we don't have to be reminded about this, but our pets are a part of our family, so we want to make sure that we're prepared for every member of our family.
Awesome, Jeri. Those are some great tips, and I love your yard sailing idea. I'm totally going to steal that, and I'm going to have a whole stock of games and things that I'm going to add to my kit this summer, I hope. One of the things that you mentioned was, you know, the rechargeable headlamp. I think that's such a good one. And I think the other thing is, you know, sometimes we have this idea, and it can be a little bit expensive to start creating an emergency kit. So it's a good thing. You can just add, like, as you said, go to yard sales in the summertime when they're kind of plentiful. You also can just add, you know, an item every time that you go shopping, so that it isn't a really big expense, but that it's something that you're kind of building over time. Sometimes, you know, a colleague or a friend might be getting rid of a tent, and that would be a good thing to just store together. I store my camping gear and my emergency kit together in my garage, so that if there was an emergency, I wouldn't have to go all over the house looking for it. The other thing, and this is more on the wildfire, perhaps, or flood safety suggestion, is that we have a suitcase or a bag in every bedroom in our house, so that if we had to leave our house quickly, that we would have the opportunity to just put the things right into the bag. We don't have to go, you know, to the basement and try to find the suitcase. It's all just right there, and you could put whatever you needed to into that little bag and quickly leave your home. I also have an emergency kit, right? So you got that awesome little pack. I think that's such a good idea for students to have, and for parents and teachers as well. I think the other reminder here is for people who drive, to have emergency kit in their car. And so in my kit, in my car, my daughter is 11. And so I have books and magazines and a stuffy, things that I think that will be important to her. Because if we're in our car for a period of time, or you know, something happens and we need to sort of wait until it's safe to move, that we have things there that we can use to occupy our time while we're waiting for emergency services, if that's necessary. So is there anything else you want to add? I know we had a question. I think this is from Mr. Niels's class around, should we worry about having an earthquake in the winter? And I heard you say, like, having the tent inside your house is really good, but earthquakes happen all the time. So
we cannot predict when they're going to happen. No. And if you know, if we were going to put it on schedule, yeah, it'd be great if it was the summer, and but
During
it
the
doesn't-
day, yeah.
during the day and on the weekend. Yeah, we can't, there's just no way of predicting that. So that's why we have to take on being prepared. So, for the students, you need to remind your parents, but you can do things too, like gathering things that are going to make you feel better. And one of the things that you mentioned about the car, so having a car kit, is actually having seasonal things in your car kit. So I change mine twice a year. So when we're getting into fall, I make sure that I have an extra pair of warm socks. I have an extra pair of mitts. I have a toque of some sort. I'm a big fan of Ziploc bags. So in one Ziploc bag, I always make sure that I have a long t-shirt that I could wear either as a clean shirt, or if I had to sleep somewhere to sleep in, extra pair of socks along with that sort of stuff. And I always rotate, things like protein bars, granola bars, that sort of thing. In the summer, instead of having the toque, I have a pair of sunglasses, I have a baseball cap, I put sunscreen, that sort of stuff, and I change it twice a year to match the season, in case I get stuck in my car. And I sort of do the same thing with my grab and go bag, because you mentioned having emergency, like a small emergency kit in the event you have to leave. So we call that a grab and go bag. So again, I personalize it for each season. The other thing is it's personalized for me. I have allergies, so I make sure I have allergy pills in there. I have reading glasses, so I have an extra pair of reading glasses. I have a big power bank, and I know that John is a fan of this. He has the same one. The other thing that I carry in my grab and go bag, and also I have it at home, this actually is a solar powered little light. And the way it works, it unfolds, and I use this camping as well. You blow it up, and when you turn it on, it's a beautiful light. And then you fold it up and you leave it out in the sun, and so I highly recommend, if you see little neat gadgets like that, that's when you go, hey mom, I really like that, maybe for my birthday or something.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of things that you can add and find that are really
sure.
neat.
And this is a good reminder, right? This is the reminder that we always have to be thinking about safety, and it has to be something that our whole family is doing, and even our whole neighborhood is doing, our school communities are doing. We always need to keep it top of mind. I'm mindful of the time here, and so I want to just say thank you so much to Alison and Dr. John and Tanya and Marc and Jeri for sharing their knowledge today. I'm going to have one final poll up here, and it just is asking you about, how do you feel after today? And I'll just invite you to put your final comments in there, and a reminder that I will send out an email with a link to this recorded session. It will go out likely tomorrow. We will post it to our YouTube page, and I will include the links in that email as well to the emergency preparedness kit information. I'll also invite you to check with your local authority. So for example, I'm in Nanaimo. So the city of Nanaimo, the regional district of Nanaimo have some really excellent emergency preparedness information, as does Jeri in Souk, for example, or the Juan de Fuca area. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're grateful to have you, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.